First time I saw it, he was screaming at the CTO. I was like, why are you behind in the product roadmap? Like the team was just like there. And this is like 4 or 5 other startups around us. And I was just like, oh, this is weird. And everybody else was like, this is not the first time. And this is like a few weeks in, started my role. And I was like, there's something wrong here.
Hey, I'm Andrew Kaplan. Welcome to the show. In this show, I chat with people who work in and around SaaS growth teams to hear their stories, learn about their journeys, and double-click on some of the toughest moments that they've experienced in their careers along the way. My guest today is my good friend, Ramli John. Unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know Ramli. He is the author of a best-selling book called Product-Led Onboarding, which has sold over 30,000 copies worldwide. He is an experienced growth advisor and a consultant and an educator. He's supported tons of brands that you know and look up to in the PLG world: Zapier, Vidyard, Lead Pages, AppQs, and a whole bunch of others. And it's really cool timing for my conversation with Ramli because when this episode premieres, Ramli will be transitioning out of his full-time role at AppQs and starting his own solo venture called Delight Path. He and I covered his whole journey from where he grew up and his high school and family experience and how that impacted him starting his own solo venture. And of course, touched on a few of his speed bumps along the way. Let's jump right into this episode. I think you're going to love it. Well, let's start here. First, thank you. Thank you for coming on, for giving me your time. I feel like you are the busiest man in SaaS. You've got work stuff going on. You've got family stuff going on. You're extremely well connected. You've got your own show at AppQs. You've got your own show outside of AppQs. You got a lot going on. And so it's a cool time for us to chat because when this episode comes out, you will be what? You just told me off air, but I want you to share kind of what you're working on, what you got cooking up behind the scenes.
Yeah, I would have started a new solo consulting thing called Delight Path, helping people improve their onboarding and make more delightful experiences. So you see the brand, it's like airline team. So I'm really excited to have that out finally.
And so you're leaving AppQs, just to lay it all out here, and you're starting your own thing. I know this is something that you and I have talked about behind the scenes and kind of dreamed about for a long time, but like, it's go time, dude, huh?
I know it is. It's just, it's like having a kid where you're never ready. Like everybody, like I was talking to one of my friends recently over the weekend. It's like, they're trying to have their first kid. It's like, oh, are you ready? Yeah, I am. It's like, no, you're not. You don't even know, bro. I think it's the same thing with doing this. It's like people are never ready. I think you just have to learn quickly, figure things out. Don't kill the baby. I mean, this is an analogy for don't kill the business. So I think it's been a long time coming and I think it's time.
And so the business obviously will morph and iterate as time goes on, but what is the initial business? Like consulting, is media part of the business? Is your podcast Power-Ups? Is that going to be a part of it? What are you thinking?
I think I'm going to pause the podcast for now, just working on figuring out getting clients. It'll be consulting and advisory. Something that I've been working on is like facilitating growth discussion and making sure, like I've been reading and running more design sprints. There's this process that Google Ventures created. It's quite an old book now. It's called Sprint by Jake Knapp. It's a 5-day process where like they have an innovation process to help design new things. And I'm like, man, we can adopt this for like activation and retention. And it's been great to be able to work with some companies through my cohort course, companies like Zapier, which I've ran at Design Sprint, a few other companies like Vidyard and a few other folks. So I love teaching. I love doing workshops. Like I know it's for some people it's like stressful, but like live teaching with teams to get everybody aligned on what is activation for us and what is the ideal process and what does delight for our user look like. So that would be what I'm thinking around advisory and consulting and facilitation to align people together.
Dude, you were made for this, man. I know you well enough to know that this is going to go, it's not going to be easy, but I think objectively, I think it's going to go really smoothly. You got a huge name in this space. You literally co-wrote the book. I can't imagine this not working. What's the URL for folks who are listening to this that are interested in just learning a little bit more?
Yeah, it's delightpath.com. So it's delight, the word delight, and then path, like flight path to delightpath.com.
Did you have to buy that URL off someone that was available on GoDaddy?
I got lucky. I was trying to find different domains and like names, and that one was $10. I just bought it $10, like right off.
Unbelievable.
I know, right?
I feel like everyone I know that went off to do their own thing, they all have like .co, .io. You got to live with the domain extensions. That's pretty sick.
Yeah, I know. It was luck, I guess, because I was trying to get happypath.com and that was being sold for 10 grand. I'm like, I'm not dropping 10 grand for a domain that I just like, that's crazy. I would not do that. So I'm like, oh, what else? So Delightful, I think people, I mean, you probably heard it here first. I'm writing a new book called Delightfully Awesome, which is about delighting customers. I've been in the process now for a year with a co-author who wrote 4 books around product. So C. Todd Lombardo, like he's known in the product space. So we're looking to get that out next year. So I'm excited about that. That's why Delight ended up, because I'm also writing a book around Delight.
Dude, you thought I was joking when I said you're the busiest man in SaaS. You got a book, you got a new venture. That's awesome, man. Congrats. I'm excited to be a fan and to cheer you on. And
thank you so much.
I'm excited for you. And I can't wait for this episode to come out because 1, I'm excited to share your story, but 2, that will mean it's go time for you. And that's sick.
Yeah, that's true.
So take us back in time a little bit. I want to hear a little bit about your story. Obviously, I want to dig into some of the speed bumps and adversity along the way, but I think I want to start with where your story begins. So take us back to little Ramli. Where are you from? What was your childhood like? And maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I was originally from Philippines. Funny enough, I grew up actually in Saudi Arabia, which is weird, but a lot of Filipinos, they ended up working abroad. And my dad was an engineer. He worked in Saudi Arabia. And then I came to Canada when I was 10. So that was almost 29 years ago. I definitely saw my parents struggle. And there was just one core memory. I was just watching Inside Out with my kid. And core memory is like one of those memories that stick with you. I think I was in my teens and my dad was working for this company, an engineering company, for like almost 15 years. And they just laid him off. They were like, you're out. And my dad, I remember he's like a strong, I don't want to use the word boomer, but he grew up during that time. And I remember crying to him and he's like, why are you crying? Why are you crying? I was just like, I shocked me. Like he doesn't, that moment I saw him cry. And I was, as a kid, I was like, this is legit. This is like messed up, really, really messed up of what is happening here. It shocked him. I guess that really shook me because, you know, you pour your heart out. He poured his heart out. He did overtime for this company and they just let him go. And I think that's, I mean, we're talking about me starting my own thing. That's always in the back of my mind. Like this businesses, they say family, they say we care about you, we say values, we say this, we have a great brand. But like when the time comes and it's the business decision is to let you go, they're just going to do it. They don't care if you have a kid. They don't care if it's like the business sense ROI, you're not needed, you're out. They'll give you that notice. They might give you some severance package. But like I've always thought in the back of my mind, I can't put my fate and my future in that situation. And I need to be in control. And that's tying back to our earlier conversation. That's really a core memory to like, you know, I need to start a business. It's always been why. Don't want to stay an employee forever.
Yeah. And did your dad, after that layoff, did he start his own business or did he go back in-house and get another engineering job?
He did end up starting his own thing. I think that's also the thing. Like he became consultant. He did his own stuff. I think that's kind of an inspiration. He's definitely an inspiration to me, like how the values that he has around like treating people well and doing his own thing rather than making sure that becoming an employee again. So I think that is true. I think that's also impacted me, that he realized that being internal forever is not the way to go. Big things have changed.
Yeah. So he taught you that entrepreneurial spirit and that lesson from a young age. I mean, how old was he when that happened?
He was around my age. I think at this age.
Wow.
Like I'm 39 right now. I think he was around late 30s, mid 40s. So he's telling me like, Ramli, like you're 38 now. Last year, that's when we came to Canada. So it's like, it's kind of like a little bit of a shock. It's like, oh my goodness, he had 3 kids by this point. I only have 1 2-year-old. It's like, Ramli, you need to hurry up. you need to hurry up a little bit. Like you get more kids, do your own thing. Come on, man.
And here you are, man. What a year.
Yeah, I know, right? It's been crazy.
And so how old were you when that happened? So your dad was in his late 30s, mid 40s. How old were you when you saw that?
Yeah, I was like in my early teens. I was like young. Like I said, I remember me crying and he's like, why are you crying? Don't cry. And seeing him cry, there was just this dissonance as to like, why is he crying? He said, don't cry. Like, that's not what we do as a family. We don't cry. And that's my brother and my sister. I'm the oldest out of three. They don't cry. That's kind of emotionally stunted us, or like we have a hard time communicating our emotions because we grew up in a place where we don't cry, and it's not a good place. And when he cried, it was like, man, this is a serious problem we have here.
Right. So he's telling you, hey, we don't cry here. And then you saw your dad cry. And so you saw how impactful it can be when you get laid off or you get fired or an employer makes a business decision, and that's motivated you to become the person that you are. I feel like even before going off on your own in this venture, at least from the outside looking in, you've always looked entrepreneurial. You've had your own podcast, you've had your own stuff on the side, you've had different newsletters and things. When did that start? Like, were you one of those people that had a bunch of businesses in high school?
I tried. I remember as a kid in high school, this is illegal. Like taking like PlayStation games, ripping it into like a disc.
Oh, burning the CD?
Yeah, CD. I'm not like, this is way back, like, chipping the PlayStation 1. Think about that. We're now on PlayStation 5, like chipping that so that you can play illegal, like trying to sell that for $5. And then, like figuring out, like tinkering around, like, oh, how do I like take the CD and rip it? What software do I need? So I didn't have a bunch of things, but I remember just being a tinkerer. Like I was like, oh, how do you turn this into that? And how do you put a quote unquote legal chip in a PlayStation so you can play it? So I didn't really have any ventures. I think that was the closest one where I know it's probably not a good example of like what legally people should do, but it was something that I remember growing up with my friends doing that.
What was your favorite PlayStation 1 game?
PlayStation 1 game, there was this game called Siphon Filter. That was a great one. Crash Bandicoot, like, come on, that was fun. Yeah, and I think when the first Grand Theft Auto came out, I'm still a big fan of Grand Theft Auto.
I never had PlayStation. I take that back. I had PlayStation at my dad's house, not at my mom's house, which is kind of was my main house. And so I only had a handful of games, and I'd mostly play at friends' houses. But when Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 came out...
Oh my goodness, yes.
That was it, dude. That was it. This episode is brought to you by Novatic. We're seeing the next phase of product-led growth emerge right now. The first phase of PLG was all about using your product as a go-to-market tool. Basically creating free plans, free trials, or reverse free trials, getting new accounts to sign up, and then layering in retention and upgrade programs. It was a solid playbook. The only challenge is that the product value is hidden behind your sign-up form, which means that most of your visitors never get to see it. The next phase of PLG is all about leading with product value, creating interactive product demos, embedding them on your website, and letting people play with them, click around, and see the value before signing up. This engages way more people, which means more experience that value, more convert to your paid plans, and more become brand advocates. If you're sold on the idea, but not sure where to start, check out Novatic. Their no-code editor makes it easy to create interactive demos, and they're offering a free trial exclusively for delivering value listeners. Go to novatic.com/value and sign up for a free trial and see for yourself. This episode is presented by AppQues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a PLG environment, and typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for growth teams. It's why my team spent years focused on improving our new user onboarding experience during my time at Wistia and at Postscript. And that's why I'm so excited that AppQues is sponsoring the show. They're just as passionate about helping product-led companies fix their onboarding and their retention as I am. They're the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for web and mobile apps, and they've helped over 1,500 SaaS orgs create exceptional onboarding experiences that convert new users into power users and brand advocates. So if you're looking for help activating more new accounts, head to appqs.com/value. They have a free new user onboarding audit, which is done by Ramli John. He literally wrote the book on new user onboarding, and he's a close personal friend of mine. For help, head to appqs.com/value. And so how did you go from being in high school, illegally ripping or burning some of the PlayStation 1 CDs? I think we're past the statute of limitations, so I think it's cool for you to share. How did you get from that world into this world? Like, what was your first couple steps into the SaaS PLG marketing universe?
Actually, I have a weird path. I studied math in university. I was a developer coding around Java, and people don't know COBOL. This is like way back then. I was working for like this CPG company, PepsiCo, and I just felt like, man, I worked there for 4 years. That's the longest job I've ever had full time. And I remember using the word, feel like my soul was dying inside. And I was like, I need to do something new. So I started a business. And people might not know this. I started a business around, first of all, this is a weird pivot, but we started off, me and my co-founder, we're both developers, creating memorials at funerals. Because we know the funerals for people were like super old. It's ugly. The website feels like they're in the 90s. So you wanted to make it more dynamic and beautiful and crowdsourced from the people. I was like, oh, this is depressing. Let's pivot. Let's pivot towards babies, creating baby books. And I was like, man, big pivot from death to life. And we started creating this software for people, for moms specifically, to scrapbook digitally their kids' stories and pictures and crowdsource that with family. People can print it out. And like a year in, we were like, we're both single guys. We have no kids. We are not married, and we are doing this. What are we doing? And that process was like, man, we're both coders. Like, it was a challenge to try to market it. We had to find communities. I was in charge of like marketing, and that's really like I realized if I wanted to do a business in the future, going back to that story, I wanted back in my mind, I need to start my own thing. I need to learn marketing. So started consulting around marketing, writing and blogging, WordPress and like blogging. And that's how I got into marketing. People started reaching out because my blog around Lean Startup got some traction to the point that I was invited to speak at the Lean Startup conference in San Francisco. And then I did consulting, and I ended up working at SaaS and working at startups at that point. So that's been the journey that I have to get into SaaS marketing and growth.
And then for those who are listening to this that aren't looking at your LinkedIn and aren't familiar with you personally, give us the 10,000 foot view kind of the steps in your career since then, just like the quick 30-second overview.
I started joining more startups specifically for SaaS. There was one that we're probably going to talk about. It lasted 6 months. Joined a CEO team of 7 where the CEO was a screamer. And I was like, I'm out. Then I moved on to another situation where I missed another red flag, and the CEO was back talking everybody. This is a larger company, 50 people. And he was just like, Ramli, you know what? Your boss sucks. I'm like, what? So I was working for the CMO. I was like, your CMO, he's the worst. Can you replace him? I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, and I guess I started building my own sense of red flag, or I call it my Ramli sense or Spidey sense around that. Ended up working for different companies, teaching, working with a company, Jilt, that got acquired by GoDaddy. It's an e-commerce email marketing company. I was leading their growth there. I connected back with Wes. Wes is, we both studied from the same university, but different years.
I was wondering how the two of you knew each other. Yeah. Okay.
We knew each other like 5-6 years before that. We connected over LinkedIn and we had a call. That's how I got into PLG and onboarding. And then now I'm here at AppQs from there.
AppQ. And then by the time this comes out, Delay Path.
Yeah, exactly. You're right.
And so, I want to double click on some of the stuff that you breezed over a little bit, because that's really what I want to get into. So I'm curious if you could tell us, you've had a cool journey, right? So you started on the coding side, you've gotten into consulting, you got into SaaS marketing, you got into growth, you worked at Product Led, which is kind of an education company, at AppQs, which is another SaaS company in the onboarding space. Tell me about a mistake or a challenging moment early in your career that if you could go back in time, you wish you could undo.
I would say, I think very early on when I was doing that startup, everybody, TechCrunch, publication, Twitter, they were all talking about how young this 19-year-old kid has raised like $1 billion. And I remember just being in my late 20s. I'm like, dude, I am like a dinosaur in the startup space. Like, I am about to die. I'm going to be extinct. And looking back, man, that's so wrong. And just like pushing through and rushing and like working hard and just overworking. And when things weren't working, I would just get upset. I remember reading the book Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, and just like how Steve Jobs created this amazing company, and he was a bit of a jerk And I was like, man, do I need to be a jerk to make something work? And unfortunately, I thought for a little bit that I need to create what Steve Jobs had a distortion field perspective where like what reality shows you is not working, but believing that it is working and brute force your way through that to the point where you treat people not well. And just realize that there was just a shock moment where I remember one of my friends was like, "Family, you're a jerk." And I just straight up, like I trust this friend and he was just open and just like, you've changed.
This is a work friend or this is a friend outside of work or?
Just a friend outside of work. And he's just like, you've changed since I've known you in high school. And I was just like, you're right. And like, what do I need to change? Because this is not who I am, who my dad raised me to be, who I believe to my core that you have to treat people well. So I think that was just a reality shock that there is time. Like I think people early on, I was like, rush over, raise $1 billion. You got to make, sell it to Facebook or Google. And now I'm like, things are different. Like there is time. I don't have to necessarily rush. And there is like more years. I think there's more things coming up. So I don't have to overwork, especially now that I have a family. I think that's even more important. I have a 2-year-old kid and a family to take care of. Like I can't just overwork. So that was a big mistake I made that I've talked to other folks. I was like, this is something I talked to April Dunford about. It's like, if I started my business 10 years ago, I would be like trying to raise money and trying to build something and that. I'm like, April's just like, I'm good. I'm good at this stage. I'm going to do it solo. I don't have any employees. As April, I told her like, you're an inspiration. You're like, yeah, this is what I want. Like, how do you find the balance? You make enough that you serve your family and spend time and have a good life to the point where you can go to trips and afford what you want and not necessarily have to be stressed out all the time. Like, how do I support my employees? And how do I raise my next fund? How do I raise my Series C? How do I make sure I grow 10% month over month? I'm like, 10%? Do you really need to go 10%? Like, that is not what I want. I think if you're VC funded in general, I think that's what they're expecting, which is not the path that I've realized I want for myself and for my family, people around me.
It's interesting. As you share that, I feel some of those feelings as a creator, where I feel like as a creator, you see all these 19-year-olds or people that are younger than us with less experience than us that are blowing up, that have all these followers and monetize their followers. And I feel that push and that pull sometimes as a creator to have done more and to be further along. How did it feel in the moment when your friend said that? Because that's like a friend, right? That's an outside of work connection, someone who knows who you are. I feel like people in high school kind of know your essence. What went through your mind and how did it feel?
It absolutely hurt. I think it was just, first of all, it was like denial. I was like, no, I'm not a jerk. What are you talking about? And then second was like, 1 second, maybe I am. And then it slowly turned into looking back and being retrospective of even how I treated my co-founder at some point where, I was like, oh, you go do that. Go. It was very harsh. Sometimes the tone of my voice, it's like, man, I am a jerk. I'm like, what do I need to be? Since then, I've gone through therapy. I think it's been super helpful to like, the problem I had when I was young was I attached my self-worth to my achievements. And I think the danger of that is now, if you don't achieve, I'm worthless. Myself is worthless. And that therapist was like, what other things can you attach your worth to? And I think having family around you who support you, that's really valuable. Like, your worth is not attached to you. My worth is not attached to my achievements. It's attached to how well I raised my kid or how much I've impacted the world. Like, I think that's something that I've been thinking a lot more about, especially since I've had a kid. Like, what is my worth attached to? And I think that looking back to, hey, you're Ramli a jerk. Like, I was a jerk because I attached my worth to my achievements. And when I wasn't achieving things, I would like, okay, I need to change people around me to get what I need to achieve, essentially.
What would your advice be to someone who's listening to this, who's nodding their head along, going, shit, I think I do that. I attach a lot of my worth to my achievements, and work is the main focus of my life right now. And I think I am a jerk at times. What would your advice be to that person listening to this today, nodding their head?
I would say I'm not a therapist. I think this is first of all. What's been helpful for me is doing things outside of work. I think having hobbies is very helpful. I know I'm not sure if you still do it, but like do woodworking, which is, I think is cool. Like having a creative output outside of work, you can like, oh, you're not just like a growth leader or you're not just a marketing SaaS guru, but you're also, for me, I'm a musician. I have musical instruments around me. I love creating music and listening to music. Andrew's a woodworker. Like I think that's important. You also, if you have people around you, you're a friend. You're a good father. I think like realizing that do things outside of work that interests you, so that your identity is not fully attached to your work or not work at all. I heard this analogy or this story recently where in North America, if you ask them people what you do, they tell you what their work is. Oh, what do you do, Ramli? Oh, I work in growth, blah, blah, onboarding. And then in Europe, if you ask them what you do, if you said, hey, I work in growth, they'll look at you funny. Because when you ask them what you do, it's more attached to like, what do you do outside of work? So I'm a wine enthusiast. So like if this is something I asked a German recently, and he's like, yeah, that's true. If you ask a German what you do, they'll say their hobby. And this is a good perspective, I think, that it's not fully attached to. It's going to be hard. This takes years of because like it's so ingrained in North American culture that the Western culture were like, your work is you. And if you work hard, you'll become this. If you don't, then you won't become that.
I love that, man. I got to start doing that. As you share that, I'm nodding my head like, oh, if someone asks me what I do, one, I don't know how to describe whatever it is that I do, but it's typically a work answer first.
You're a podcaster. You're great at this. Like you're an interviewer, you're a conversationalist. I think that's even outside of work. I think you still do woodworking. That's super fun.
Hell yeah, man.
Oh man, that's
Can I share one other idea that's been helpful for me?
Yeah, please.
It's like, it's cool timing because I'm in my office as we're chatting right now. And I just got a vision board. Well, it's a whiteboard, but I'm using it as a vision board and it's right next to me. It's in my office. I look at it every day and I have one work related thing on that vision board. I have other things that are health related, others that are hobby related. Like for me, like golf is kind of the hobby that I'm pursuing right now, like woodworking and power tools and a 6-week-old aren't really a good mix. So I've been kind of shelving that hobby for a minute, but still part of my identity. And so that way, if my work achievements don't hit this year, it's really just one of the things on my board. And that's been something that's been helpful for me to have a physical representation of all of the different facets of me. And that's kind of what I'm hearing you describe as well.
Yeah, no, that's so good. Vision board. Is it for this year or like do you refresh that every year? I'm curious how.
I actually did it when I was on parental leave because I had all this time to reflect. And a lot of my goals this year, like, we moved in January, Mia was born in May. And so a lot of the first half of this year was like kind of just re-ground ourselves, find our foundation as a family after all of these change moments. But I felt like during parental leave, I had a minute to catch my breath. And I was like, who do I want to become now that we have this new foundation? I'm a new dad. I'm not sleeping a lot. What are the areas in my life that I want to pursue and want to grow? And how do I find balance with all this stuff? And I just needed to write it out. And so it was helpful for me.
That's so good. That's the other thing that I would add. I think people, they're in the rush of like, when I was a kid, I was like, go, 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 go. But like having moments of reflection is so, so valuable. I think moments of silence, moments of thought, having silence and I think the power of boredom is so, so powerful to like reflect on like, what do I really want? Who am I really? Like tying back to our conversation around what is my identity tied to? And is that healthy? Some of the best leaders have that. There's this book. I've not read it, but I've heard a lot about it by Susan Cain called Quiet, how like the best leaders are introverts because they give themselves time to reflect and think and write and journal and create vision board, which you did. And I think that's another healthy mindset thing for leaders, especially in high growth startups where you can get into stressful situations to have those reflective moments.
I actually want to double click on those stressful moments as a leader because earlier, I'm shifting gears a little bit, but earlier you started telling us a story at one of your stops where you only were for 6 months that you encountered a screamer CEO. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about, you don't have to say the company or the CEO's name, but just kind of what was going on, where you were at, and a little bit more about that situation for folks that maybe are in situations where they work for a jerk. Maybe it's a screamer or not a screamer, but they're in some situation that feels maybe the way that it felt for you. Can you tell us a little bit more?
By that point, I was working as a consultant for like 3 or 4 years, and I was itching to working internally. So a recruiter reached out and was like, "Hey, we're the startup. It's fast growing. It's in fintech. It's in SaaS, and they're looking for somebody just like your skill, which is like SaaS growth." And so I came into the interview, met with the CEO and the CTO. Oh, these people are cool. There were some certain red flags where I can't necessarily point out what it is, but like just the relationship between the CEO and CTO, where like there's certain moments when they don't agree, and he would talk over the CTO, just like,
In the interview process, this was happening?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like he would talk over and CTO would ask, and he would like interrupt him. I was like, oh, okay, that's what CEOs do. I don't know. That was a red flag. And I met the team. There was like 7 people at that point. We were in a co-working space in Toronto, downtown Toronto. It's cool. This place is cool. Look at that. It's flashy. It got coffee, it got espresso. And
Right. This is what startups are like. Startups are hard. That's what everyone meant. They meant,
yeah, right. This is what they do. They have to be, yeah. So I joined, and then this is like an open office concept. And first time I saw it, he was screaming at the CTO. I was like, why are you behind in the product roadmap? Like, and the team was just like there. And this is 4 or 5 other startups around us. And I was just like, oh, this is weird. And everybody else was like, the other companies were not looking up. It's like, this is not the first time. And this is like a few weeks in, started my role. And I was like, there's something wrong here. I kept working at it. He kept asking me like, oh, it was just a micromanager. Like every time I write blog or copy or PR piece, it's like, oh, you need to change this word, or like, this is not the right color. It needs to be this. It was like, oh my, it's like pretty close. And then he started screaming at me too. He was like, why are you behind with growth? It's like, why are you behind with leads? You need to do this and that. And then our VP of sales was like, your sales is behind. And he did something weird where like he hired another sales leader, like another sales, while the current sales is. So now there's 2 VP of sales. Like everybody knew the other sales guy was getting fired soon. And I'm like, this is not, I don't feel good about this. And just 6 months in, I was just like, I don't think I can do this. I think you've started screaming at everybody. And I left, and then he got upset because apparently he paid the recruiter X percentage of my salary.
and it was after the 90 days.
It was 180 days. And so he wanted his money back, but it was not in the contract. And I talked to the recruiter. I told her what happened and what the situation is. And she's like, yeah, I think that's toxic. I totally agree. And she wanted to support me getting another role. But before I left, I already had found another role. I wanted to make sure I set myself up. So I just remember like, man, I don't want to work for a jerk. Like I was a jerk. And that was one thing that also like a core memory for me, where like number one thing whenever I look to work somewhere, is this person I'm going to be working under or for, is he or she a good person? Is like overall just a nice human being who cares about people? And if the answer is no, like I've said to no to 2 or 3 other great opportunities because I didn't feel good about it. I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but I've been lucky enough that the last 3 people that I've worked for has been really great. I think it's served me well to have this spidey sense, Ramli sense going with that specific memory.
I feel like the best lessons come from painful moments, right? You talked about the lesson from your dad and how that experience shaped you wanting to be an entrepreneur yourself, the experience with the CEO yelling and the way that it made you feel and how that taught you to seek out better quality leaders and to have that be a filter that you filter for. I'm curious, because I worked at a company where it wasn't a screamer, but a lot of the other adjectives that you talked about were at a company where I worked at. I was only there for 6 months too. I also had a spidey sense like, fuck this. This doesn't feel good. And I remember a specific moment where the first time I realized this wasn't a good fit for me, I forget the exact details, but I remember looking around the room because there's about 11 people in the room. And I remember looking around kind of thinking, are they okay with this? How come nobody told me? Did they think this is acceptable? Because it doesn't feel acceptable to me. Is it me? Is it them? What is going on? Did you have a moment like that? Because you said there was other people in the room as well. They'd presumably been at the company longer. Did you have any of those feelings?
Is this normal? I think that's the question I asked myself. Is this what I'm like at that point, I've not worked in a startup internally. I've consulted with quite a few. In San Francisco, it wasn't like that. And like internally, like working with different, like as a consultant, I was like, is this a normal part of a startup growing up? Because I've never had this experience. And you're right, like looking around, it's like, oh, I guess this, why isn't the CTO saying anything? Like, I'm not sure. They've co-founded a startup before, which they've kind of sold. I don't know by how much, but like, is he okay with this? Because he stuck with it to the second startup. That was like one of the things that I questioned. So I'm like, is it me as well? Yeah. And to people who are listening to this here in that situation, that is not normal. This is not like what normal human beings do. They're not screamers. They don't call people like jerks or there's a certain level of respect that every human, no matter what, where they're at, it should be given to. And if that's not, then that is not absolutely normal.
So you listen to your intuition is kind of what you followed in your circumstance to let you know that this isn't normal or acceptable for me and I need to look to do something else.
I think one thing that's also been that I didn't have then was having people around me who I can ask, is this normal? Because then now, one of the things that I've built up is like a board of personal advisors. I know companies have that so that they can ask them, hey, we're going through this rough patch. Like, is this normal? And now I think like I've asked, it's great. I can ask a few folks like, hey, I'm going through this. What should I do? I think in this case, I didn't have that, made it actually worse that I didn't have somebody to ask that. I probably would have left sooner if they are like, yeah, that's not normal. Do something much, much sooner rather than much later.
I love that takeaway. Yeah, build some kind of support system. Ideally, people that have similar lived experience. I mean, certainly it can be family, but ideally other folks that work in adjacent roles or in adjacent companies and things like that in tech to help you normalize or detangle what the heck is going on.
Yeah, I think that's so true. It's been super helpful. I think even as I transition into this new venture, new business with Delight Path, Andrew, you've been helpful. I think people who are listening in, like Andrew's such a cool dude. Like you've given me a ton of advice the last year or two. Other folks like Maple Dunford and Giolotti and Ronnie Higgins. There's just so many folks that has been instrumental. And I'm sure you've done the same where like you've created this community where like solopreneurs are helping each other out. And I think that's such a valuable thing that I wish I had. I guess that's the other thing. I wish I had much, much earlier. Find my people, or like some people call it their shine crew. You find your shine crew, people who will help you shine. That is a quote that I got from another person.
I got the quote from them as well. I know this shine crew. There's this circle of badass women, really, that are on a text chain. Who told me about it? I forget, but it's the same person who told you, I bet.
Probably. I know Georgiana Lottie is in that, April Dunford, Talia Wolf, Joanna Weed also is in that, the copy hackers person. So
love that. Yeah, get the board of directors going. Speaking of kind of normalizing and getting feedback on situations, I'm curious to know what's been the toughest feedback that you've received as an employee in your journey along the way, right? You've worked at some early stage companies. They're generally tough. Your roles are not well defined. Usually you're working for new managers and new situations, and it's kind of the Wild West on all sides. What's been the toughest feedback you've received?
It's something that I've gotten quite a few times, that the feedback is like, Ramli, you're too quiet. And I'm like, yeah, I know, because I'm an introvert. It's like, okay, what does that mean? And for me, every time I've been a new manager or I work with somebody new, the way that I work, the way that I think, I need to digest information and then just chew it up and then give it out as something as valuable as possible. And it's just always consistent. Like, if you want to move up, you got to speak up more. You got to be louder, not necessarily louder, but you've got to be more talking. And it's something that I have had to stuff because it's in my internal instinct is only speak up if you're actually going to say something valuable. And that makes sense. But to the point where like maybe I overthink things to the point where like I already have something valuable and I wait. I got a leadership coach like a couple of years ago, and it's helped me reframe, especially like interrupting people when they're speaking, especially in virtual settings where like, who's next to talk? And why is it so hard for you to interrupt people? It's like, oh, that's rude. And when somebody interrupts you and they have something valuable to say, do you think they're rude? And I was like, no, it's helpful. It's like, do you respect that person more for saying something valuable and saying it? It's like, yeah, it's the same for you. And something that I've learned is like, just say it. And if you guys talk over each other, at least they know that you have something to say after, or they say it's your turn. And it's kind of helped me like, hey, if I have a thought that's valuable, don't overthink it. Just like, hey, I think this is this. And it's been super helpful. I think I just have to learn how to also think faster on my feet and figure out exactly what to ask.
I was curious to know, on that last point, I'll share a quick story and then I'll loop it back around. So when I was leading growth at Wistia, I had a woman on my team who was quiet in meetings. And I called on her one time because she was brilliant. And I called on her and I said, hey, person's name, you've been a little quiet in this meeting. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this and we all trust your judgment. What do you think? And they shared whatever answer they shared. And then after the meeting, they had the courage to pull me aside. And they said something like, hey, I know why you did what you did in the meeting, and I appreciate you including me, but don't ever fucking do that again. I hated it.
Like word for word?
Within 1% degree variance. Yes. She was like, it didn't feel good. She said, because when you do that, when you put me on the spot, my brain speeds up 1,000,000 miles an hour. And then whatever coherent thought I might share, I can't access it because I'm so flustered. And they said, if you'd like me to participate in the meeting more, I'm happy to do it. I need more time to think. So she said, could you share the agenda the night before? I will read it every single time. I'll have time to think about where I want to contribute and pick my spots, and I'll be more likely to contribute in the meeting because I don't like being put on the spot. Please don't do that again. And it was like a light bulb moment for me as a leader of the team because, one, I felt bad and I didn't mean to feel bad. I didn't mean to put them on the spot. I just wanted them to participate. But two, it gave me a system that I could use. And so I was curious to know from your perspective, if it was like in the moment, your brain speeds up and it's like, oh, the pressure of everybody looking at you doesn't feel good, or if it's just a matter of you picking your spots and sort of having the courage to interrupt or to interject or whatever.
I would say it's a little bit of both. I think having the agenda up front is also helpful. And also, I think the other thing that I need to train myself is to think faster, think on the fly. I used to be part of Toastmasters, which is this speaking group. And one of the things that exercises they do is they pick somebody out and they give a topic, let's say hot dog. And for 2 minutes, you have to talk about the hot dog. So I think not necessarily that, like joining a Toastmaster could be helpful because like it does help me think better on the fly at that moment. And also one of the things that I've learned is I don't have to say a statement. I can ask a question. Another book that's been super helpful that somebody suggested recently about like, oh, if you want to get to solo consulting, you should read this book. It's called Coaching Habits.
Oh, it's funny. That's one of the ones I recommend a lot. It's on my shelf.
Right. 7 questions, right? It's so good. What's on your mind? And just like rather than maybe saying a statement, like asking a thoughtful question could also be super, super valuable. And that could be helpful as well. So I think it's a little bit of both in the sense that having a little bit of preparing for it, but like when the discussion is going, it's like being in like having jazz, where like somebody's like has a new melody or a tune and like you can't just go with the playbook that you have because now they're talking about X and what you prepared for was Y. So it's a abrupt shift. Like how do you make sure that you're in the same tune and like riffing off what they're talking about? So I think those things have been super. I'm glad that you've read Coaching Habits. I just read it last month and it was like, where has this book been all my life?
I've read it a few times and I've got book notes that I give out sometimes to my clients in case they want kind of the short form version of it. And so I love the analogy that you shared, the jazz analogy. And I think that the mantra that you shared, it's a personal mantra, but I think it's something that a lot of folks can learn from, which is if you're feeling self-conscious or you're feeling like you want to contribute more in the meeting, but you're not sure if it's the right thing to share, or you're kind of in your head about it, you shared a mantra that was, I'm going to paraphrase, something like, I have something important to say and people want to hear from me. And I love that. And that's just such a simple thing. You put it on a sticky note, put it on your desk, put it on your laptop to remind you and make that top of mind.
It's funny you say that. That's exactly what my leadership coach says. Put it on a sticky note. You have something valuable to say, just say it. I think that's so good. I think just speak it out.
As we start to wrap up a little bit here, I want to do some quick hitters with you. And so you've had a lot of experience in the startup world. I'm curious to know, like, what's the most cliche startup thing that you've seen where you've worked at either a company where you've worked or a company where you've consulted or maybe coached through product led or whatever? What comes to mind?
cliche thing. Yeah. Fail fast and break things. It goes back to like, let's go faster. Go, go, go. Come on, man. Like, I understand failing fast, but if you fail fast and learn nothing, that's a failure. If you fail fast, learn fast, then maybe that's not a failure and you pivot. That makes sense.
And what about any in-office things? I mean, you talked about working in an open office with a CEO who screamed, but for me, I think about my time at HubSpot in the early days, and the sales reps would be like throwing footballs around the room, and they'd bring the drink carts around on Friday afternoons. Did you encounter any of that stuff in your travels?
100%. Even that's one of the reasons why I missed my spidey sense in that. It was like they had ping pong tables, they had Friday beer, espresso machine, unlimited espresso, all this like perks in that co-working space that they had. And it was like open space and like whiteboards everywhere. I think that was cool back then. Not so much when you're older with kids.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of that stuff is a crutch anyways. It's like ping pong tables and all that. That's great if you treat people well. But if you don't treat people well, I don't care about that stuff.
It's so true. That is not a replacement for good culture. Company work culture, like where it starts from the top and how they treat people and how they move and grow is as important as achieving those milestones.
Yeah. Has there been a pivotal moment or person that has kind of impacted your career trajectory? Obviously, you talked about your dad early on, but I'm curious to know once you got in the workforce, if there's been another one of those.
Yeah, when I was working at PepsiCo, there was this older gentleman developer who really he was working internally, but he was a consultant. So he was like a Kobo consultant where like he was getting paid a lot. And he got me into jazz guitar and he got me into wine at some point. Like, Ramli, you got to try out this wine. And also like he shares some advice about internally working at a company. That's great early on, but much later on, it's much better to do your own thing. And Dave McKendrick, I haven't talked to him for a while. I should reach out, but he was super, super helpful in chatting with me. He also got me into iPhone. Like I was a BlackBerry user because I got to represent the Canadians. And then unfortunately it didn't work out. So I got into iPhone because of him.
Once you get those blue techs, you can't go back.
Yeah, that's so true. And the touchscreen and yeah, so I totally agree.
And we were obviously just talking about communication and speaking up in meetings, but I'm curious if you could go back in time, what is one skill that you wished you worked on sooner?
One skill that I worked on other than communication, does it have to be soft or hard skill?
No, what comes to mind? These are quick hitters. It's your truth.
I would say much early on, I would say it's really going back to reflecting and something that I've learned from Wes Bush, actually. One of the things he does is he blocks off whole days where this is thinking day. I'm going to think about the future. I think earlier I was just like in a go-go mode and having like space to block off to think once a month, which he did, could be once a quarter, or just what do I really want? Am I in the right trajectory? Is, I think, very, very helpful. I think that's one habit that I wish I did sooner, or skill, having a little bit more reflection.
Me too. And obviously you're starting your solo venture. What are the goals that you have for yourself at this stage in your career as you start this next chapter?
Goals, I would say the bare minimum, support my family. I think that's support the minimum needs. But at the higher level, something that I've been thinking about, there's this YouTuber that I watch a lot, Mark Rober. He did a commencement speech at Stanford. I think it's at Stanford or MIT, where like he has a young kid that's autistic. He's on the spectrum. And one of the things advice that he gave his kid, and something that he's been thinking about as he creates more YouTube videos, because there's a lot of YouTube videos that are like pranks and like dance and TikTok. And he creates like science videos to help kids learn science in a fun way. It's like, how do I leave the world better than I got here? And I was like, dang. And I think that puts a lot of perspective as I have a kid as well. Like, it's true, I want to leave something behind for him. I think long term, that is one of the goals. I want to leave a legacy and impact. Short term, it's definitely supporting my family and being able to also go to trips and building core memories together to go to places, visit you in Boston soon.
Hell yeah, man. And it's just like what you were talking about before, work being part of the identity. not the whole identity, right? So it was cool that your answer there was really including and highlighting those non-work things. Work's a small piece of the puzzle, but it's really the time with family, those core memories, living a life of balance and intention. I think that's beautiful, dude. Thank you for coming on, for sharing your story, for sharing some of the speed bumps along the way. For folks who are listening that are thinking like, how can we get more? Give us the URL one more time and then tell us where they should follow you, what social networks you're active on.
Yeah, people can check it out at delightpath.com. And then people can also find me on LinkedIn, Ramli John. There's only one Ramli John. Hopefully nobody else shows up. I'm also active, not as active on Twitter X, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me.
Connect on LinkedIn. We'll put the links in the show notes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I appreciate it.